Why hello there, and welcome back to Tabletop Ferox, and my first look into the Project Black Flag playtest materials. But before we get into that, a little context for those who do not remember, because someone is counting on you not remembering. A little while back, Wizards of the Coast announced that they were going to deauthorize the OGL and replace it with a new, more restrictive OGL, along with a possibly even more restrictive virtual tabletop policy. And people did not like that. So, they started canceling their D&D Beyond subscriptions and, just generally threatening to stop giving all of their money to Wizards of the Coast without a fight. So then, of course, Wizards of the Coast, they backed down, they listened to the fans, and they announced that they would not deauthorize the open game license for 5th edition. They very intentionally did not say anything about how they were going to be handling third-party licensing, or even if they are going to implement that virtual tabletop policy when they bring out 6th edition and drop support for 5th, which is going to happen next year. And I will be reminding you of this every time I cover D&D or D&D adjacent topics, because it is very important that everyone remember that was what Wizards of the Coast was trying to do, and that they never said they are not going to do it again in the future. They just said whatever they thought was going to make people stop talking about it so you would go back to buying anything with a red ampersand on it until such time as they feel like they can get away with something like this again. Anyway, back on topic, during that very brief, oh my god, maybe Wizards of the Coast doesn't actually care about the community as anything other than a plump, juicy citrus that they can squeeze money out of phase, there were somewhere in the neighborhood of, 6,000 new fantasy role-playing games announced. Most of which were, of course, dropped as soon as their creators were able to just latch themselves back onto the Dragon Teat, but of those remaining, perhaps one is actually noteworthy. Project Black Flag from Kobold Press. The only one that anyone is actually talking about, and the one that you clicked on this video to hear me talk about. So first things first, they did announce a while back that this is going to be fully backwards compatible with 5th edition, and that killed about 90% of my enthusiasm for the project, because it means that whatever they do, they are constantly going to be asking themselves, are we straying too far from D&D? Is what we're doing too different? Is it too difficult? Is it too simple, too complex, too creative, too interesting, too fun to be chained to the rotting corpse of the Dragon game? Basically, they've set themselves a very low goal with an equally low ceiling. But, maybe they will overcome that and create an amazing game that is still, somehow fully compatible with the okayest fantasy role-playing game. And maybe they won't. Either way, I am looking at the content and talking about it here on the internet. So this first playtest package covers character creation, or more specifically, ability scores, lineage and heritage, which is their replacement for races, and backgrounds. They do not include classes, but as it is intended to be backwards compatible, you can use the classes from 5th edition. And it is worth noting that the way this is being presented is way better than the 6th edition playtest. Basically, they are giving you, the unfinished chapter of the book with the unfinished content omitted. So you do get some actual context for the rules you are reading instead of just the rules by themselves. And because of that context, even though it's not included in the playtest packet, it is mentioned that they are still going to be using the Universal Proficiency bonus, which just goes to show their strong dedication to including even the worst elements of 5th edition and 4th edition. Although also worth noting, the character creation checklist includes your luck points are set to 0. Once again, that is a thing that's not covered in this playtest, but it is a thing that's going to be there, which could be interesting. Or it could just be like the lucky feat applied by default. It's just a new thing that will be in this game, even though it has not been detailed as of yet. So onto the actual rules though. Attributes are still determined with 4d6, keep the highest 3, but now you get to add +2 to one and +1 to another. And if that sounds kind of familiar, it's because that is exactly how ability scores are done in the 6th edition playtest. So, you know, just a wellspring of creativity so far in this thing. Also, of course, point buy and array are still options there, but let's move on to the lineage and heritage, which is where they actually do start to change things a little, even if only thematically. Basically, a lineage is the character's race, so, you know, dwarf, elf, human, etc., and heritage is their culture. And a character race has always contained both biological and cultural elements. For some reason, people have a hard time understanding that, but now they have definitively split them into two different things. At least thematically. The playtest packet provides 3 sets of lineage and heritages: dwarf, elf, and human. So let's look at those, starting with dwarf. The dwarven lineage sets size as medium and speed at 25 feet, grants night vision out to 60 feet, which is the same as dark vision, except they don't call it that, as well as dwarven resilience, which grants advantage on saves versus poison and resistance to poison damage, and dwarven toughness, which grants +1 additional hit points per level. And those are of course exactly the names used in D&D, which begs the question of why they felt the need to rename dark vision. So basically it is a 5th edition hill dwarf, minus the ability score adjustments, weapon tool and language proficiencies, and stone cunning. Or a 6th edition playtest dwarf, albeit one with a speed of 25 and without tool proficiencies or stone cunning, which is a completely different ability than in 5th edition. And then we have 2 heritage options: Fireforge, which are the dwarves that do all the world-renowned metalwork stuff, and grants proficiency with double proficiency bonus with either glassblower's tools or smith's tools, resistance to fire damage, Ignan as a bonus language from, you know, hanging out with fire elementals, access to the mending cantrip, but it can only be used on metal, and starting languages of Common and one other, although Dwarvish is stated as being typical, and this is a thing I will discuss later. Then there are the Stone Dwarves, which are, I guess, the underground mining dwarves. Like, they are also renowned craftspeople, including for metalwork, but I guess they're just not as well known for their metalwork as the dedicated metalworking dwarves. Anyway, they gain proficiency with the Battle Axe, Hand Axe, Light Hammer, and Warhammer, proficiency with light and medium armor, and no speed reduction for heavy armor, proficiency with Smith's tools, Brewer supplies, or Mason's tools, proficiency on checks made to determine the origin of metalwork or masonry, or double proficiency if a proficient skill also applies, and starting languages of Common and one other, and once again, typical creatures of this heritage choose Dwarvish. So what is the deal with that typical creatures language? Basically, a heritage as is defined here is purely cultural. So a heritage can be applied to a creature with any lineage. So for example, if your character was an elf raised amongst dwarves, you could take the Fireforged heritage instead of one of the elven heritages. And like, I totally understand what they're going for here, and I like the idea that they're going for here, but I am so far not in love with the application. Because as it is right now, it just kind of feels like them rebranding subraces instead of making a new thing that is a heritage. Like from the examples here, resistance to fire and magical mending abilities don't really seem like a thing that you just kind of pick up from being raised in a particular culture. They seem like the sort of things that are granted to you for generations of servitude to the volcano god, or some kind of divine connection to the minerals and lava of the earth. Like, I don't see how those abilities that are presumably gained from living in and around volcanoes are fundamentally different than, say, the dark vision that you get from, you know, living underground. Also, just kind of overall, it feels like the two options here are dwarf and, oh dang, we gotta think of another kind of dwarf. Fire dwarves, you know, because of the forges there's fire and they hang out with fire elementals and volcanoes. Like, they took one element of the classic dwarf and then built a whole subtype around it while still leaving that as part of the classic dwarf. So far, kind of unimpressed with the dwarves, but let's keep going and look at the elves. The elf lineage sets size at medium and speed at 30, grants night vision out to 60 feet, keen senses which grants proficiency in perception, magic ancestry, which grants advantage versus being charmed and immunity to magical sleep, and trance, which lets them trance for 4 hours instead of sleeping. So once again, basically the 5th edition elf minus the ability score adjustments, bonus languages, and subrace. Or the playtest elf minus that stupid elven lineage thing. And the provided heritage options, which remember are not exclusively for elves, are the cloud elves, which are the elitist magical elves and get a cantrip and then 2 spells from a specific spell school as they level up, proficiency in the arcana skill, and starting languages of Common and 2 others, listed as typically Elvish and Draconic. And then there are Grove Elves, which are the woodland ones, and get advantage on interactions with non-hostile beasts, a climbing speed equal to walking speed, proficiency in the longsword, shortbow, and longbow, and starting languages of Common and 1 other. Unsurprisingly, that would typically be Elvish. So, dwarves weren't great, but elves are a little bit better. I very much like what they're doing with the Grove Elves here. I feel like the Woodland Elf is a cool concept that is somewhat underexplored. And when it is explored, the actual connection to nature is somewhat downplayed. They're more just, they are the elves that live in nature, not the elves that are a part of the natural world. Essentially more ranger flavored than druid, and I think these Grove Elves are a lot more druid flavored, and I like that. And overall, I would say the heritages are much better applied here. All of the things that you get are things that one could reasonably learn from being brought up in a culture. They do still feel very much like these are the 2 elf subraces, but it would not be unbelievable that a goblin could wander into the Elven Grove and be taught those skills. Anyway, there is 1 lineage/heritages left. I really wish they had a name for that combination. And of course, it is the one that is always the most exciting. The human lineage sets size at medium, or small if under 5 feet, and a speed of 30. And they also get the Ambition ability, which grants proficiency in 1 skill and a bonus talent, which is like a feat, except they don't call it that. And now the heritage options. Nomadic, which provides advantages on saves made to resist debilitating weather effects, and the ability to lower exhaustion by 1 level after a long rest. Proficiency in the survival skill, and starting languages of Common and 1 other. The typical options being Dwarvish and Elvish, because dwarves and elves are kind of the only other things that exist in this game right now. And then Cosmopolitan, which grants the inability to get lost or surprised while in cities, the ability to add your proficiency bonus to checks made to understand the purpose or significance of a building, rite, or object from a culture you aren't familiar with, and starting languages of Common and 2 others. Try and guess which ones are typical. And that was humans, and overall, the heritages provided for humans fit the concept of a heritage the best, but that is largely just down to humans' position as the default in fantasy settings. Like, some elves live in the towering cities and study the ancient arcane secrets, while others live in the magical fey groves and are one with nature. Some dwarves live deep underground where they mine the earth for its precious resources, while others take those resources and craft them into the finest goods known the world over. And then humans, it's like, some of them live in cities, some don't. And this is, of course, an issue that goes far beyond this specific game, and one that I will be making a video on eventually. I've just been very busy and tired lately. But now on to the backgrounds, each of which provides skill proficiencies, additional proficiencies, equipment, and a choice of talents. The only options provided this time being the Scholar, who gains proficiency in 2 skills from Arcana, History, Nature, and Religion, as well as 2 additional languages or 1 type of tool or vehicle relevant to your field of study, as well as a bottle of ink, a quill, a small knife, a reference book on a highly specific subject of your choice, a set of common clothes, and a pouch containing 10 gold. And the choice of the polyglot, school specialization, or trade skills talents. Then the soldier, who gets proficiency in 2 of animal handling, athletics, medicine, or survival, proficiency in land or water vehicles, and 1 tool of your choice, as well as a symbol of rank, a mess kit, a pack of playing cards or a set of dice, a set of common clothes, and a pouch containing 10 gold, and have the choice of armor training, combat casting, or combat conditioning talents. Each background also has a little adventuring motivation D8 table. So overall, the backgrounds are kind of like in 5th edition and the playtest backgrounds. I want to say more like the playtest background, since you do get a feat and the +2 to one ability score, +2 to another. They just, moved that from the background to the general ability scores. And that is really it for this playtest packet, aside from the aforementioned talents, which I don't really want to go over, but what the hell, there's only 10 of them. Combat casting. Automatically succeed on concentration checks when DC is lower than the spellcasting DC. Use a cantrip as an attack of opportunity or when a hostile creature enters an adjacent space, and cast while holding a shield or weapon. Elemental Savant. Choose 1 damage type. You can convert the damage of spells with different damage types to that one. Also, you can reroll 1s of the damage type spells naturally using that element. Mental Fortitude. Reroll 1 mental saving throw once per long rest, and get a saving throw against ongoing mental effects at the end of each turn, even if it is not normally allowed. School Specialization. Choose 1 school of magic. Spells from that school get +1 to attack rolls and DCs, as well as half the time and cost to add to your spellbook. Armor Training. Gain proficiency in the lowest level of armor in which you are not currently proficient. Armored Combatant. +1 to AC while wearing heavy armor, and damage reduction against weapon attacks equal to your proficiency bonus. Combat Conditioning. Increase the size of your hit die by 1 step, and gain +2 hit points for each level you already have. Hand-to-hand. Proficiency with unarmed strikes. 1d6 strength unarmed strike damage for medium creatures, 1d4 plus strength for small, and advantage on checks to initiate or escape a grapple. Polyglot. Learn 3 new languages. Advantage on charisma checks made to interact with non-hostile creatures for whom one of those languages is their primary language, and proficiency bonus checks made to understand unknown languages. And trade skills. Proficiency with 1 skill and tool or vehicle, or 2 tools or vehicles, and the ability to make 2 gold per day applying a trade. So there are all of the talents. Overall, some are a bit more powerful, some are a bit less powerful. Overall, I'd say they are slightly more powerful on average than a standard D&D feat. And that was the Project Black Flag playtest packet. Overall, I kind of went into this thing wanting the "take that, Wizards of the Coast" attitude I was seeing online to be justified, but not really expecting that much, and, in general, my expectations were met. As I said earlier, they are severely tying their hands by forcing compatibility with an edition of Dungeons & Dragons that is on its last legs. Even if they have really good ideas, there's just not that much they can do with them, since they have to keep it 80% the same as 5th edition in order to remain compatible with their back catalog. And I know it seems like I'm being a bit harsh here, but right now I am just not seeing the purpose of this product. Okay, it's a revised version of 5th edition, but so is 6th edition. When 4th edition came out, it was in no way intended to be compatible in any way with 3rd edition. So 3rd edition compatible core rules was a niche that existed for Pathfinder to fill. But when it comes to 6th edition, they're making such a big deal about how compatible it's going to be with 5th edition that they are refusing to even call it a new edition. So what I'm looking at right now is 2 sets of playtest rules for 2 slightly different revisions of 5th edition, and I'm just not really seeing why this one is the better option. If the reasoning is because it's not Dungeons & Dragons, a lot of games are not Dungeons & Dragons, and are objectively better because they are not trying to force themselves into a Dungeons & Dragons shaped hole. And right now, this is just kind of looking like a game for people who are mad at Wizards of the Coast, but also unwilling to play anything other than Dungeons & Dragons. And it does seem like the sort of thing where the relevancy of this product is going to be directly tied to how upset people are currently with Wizards of the Coast. But, you know, hey, maybe I'm being overly cynical. Maybe as this playtest progresses, it is going to be amazing. But as for now, it's just kind of underwhelming and feels more like an empty threat aimed at Wizards of the Coast than it does an intentional game. But I will continue looking at and bringing you my thoughts on the playtest materials because I might as well give them the benefit of the doubt. Like, I'm giving Wizards of the Coast the benefit of a doubt that their playtest is going to stop being horrible, so I should at least have the common decency to extend that courtesy to companies that are not awful. And thank you for watching, with extra special thanks to my Fightin' Flail Snails, Samuel Gorski, Ranty Mulholland, and Toshirokuro. If you'd like to be cool like them, you can check out my Patreon where you can get early access to videos and fun stuff that I make for the Patreon. But if you don't want to do that, that's cool too. You can still hit all the lovely buttons, like, subscribe, these other videos which either myself or the Cold Heartless YouTube algorithm have lovingly selected for you, which I'm sure are lovely videos that you will also enjoy. And I will see you next time.